It's been more than a month since the US-Israeli war on Iran began. The US and Israel have been bombing Iran and assassinating key political personnel. Iran has retaliated by striking Israel and attacking US bases in West Asia. However, the purpose and the objectives of the war keep changing. President Trump listed several objectives that he seeks to achieve before ending the war with Iran. Trump said that the prime objective of the war is to destroy and raze Iran's missile infrastructure to the ground. Even though Washington claims that most of Iran's missile capabilities have already been degraded, Tehran continues to launch missiles and drones at Israel and the Gulf monarchies. Trump has also vowed that Iran will never be allowed to get nuclear weapons. Early this week, Trump said that the U.S. would retrieve the uranium, which is reportedly buried deep under a mountain facility. But he added that the uranium could only be retrieved if the U.S. strikes a deal with Iran. Experts warn that without a deal, seizing the uranium will be a dangerous mission involving a sizable deployment of U.S. troops into Iran. Last weekend, Trump issued a 48-hour deadline to Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. president threatened to strike Iran's power plants if they did not open the critical waterway. However, Trump postponed the deadline to April 6th, saying that they need to create space for in-depth, detailed, and constructive talks. Meanwhile, Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, says that the U.S. is preparing for a ground attack despite publicly engaging in diplomatic efforts to end the war. Trump has reiterated multiple times that the U.S. will be winding down the war. However, there's no clarity on his next move or his exit strategy. Early this week, the U.S. president said that he would bring an end to the war by escalating the conflict, while also pushing for a negotiated settlement with Tehran. Meanwhile, there seems to be no red lines in the ongoing war. The U.S. and Israel conducted overnight strikes on the Iran University of Science and Technology in Tehran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have warned of retaliatory strikes on U.S. universities in West Asia. The IRGC has told the U.S. to issue a statement condemning the bombing of the universities by 12 noon Tehran time on Monday, or face the retaliatory attacks. It says that 2 universities will be struck in retaliation for the destruction of 2 Iranian universities. Iran has also repeatedly reiterated that this war is of Trump's choice. Amidst all this, the U.S. has also replaced its negotiators midway in its ongoing talks with Iran. An Axios report has revealed that U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance will be taking charge in conducting back-channel talks with Iran. He will be replacing Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Trump also loosened sanctions on oil tankers stranded at sea in a bid to contain rising fuel prices owing to the ongoing war. For every action taken by the U.S. and Israel, there has been an equal reaction or retaliation from Iran. The U.S. and Israel recently struck several desalination and steel plants in Iran. In response, Iran struck desalination plants in Bahrain and industrial hubs across the Gulf, reportedly causing material damage. Joining us now is Dr. Glenn Diesen. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. Professor Diesen, good to see you. Thank you very much for making time for us. Without speculating, what do you think Trump's next move on Iran will be?
Well, unfortunately, we might be left with speculations because it is uncertain. Everything indicates that he will probably escalate, that is, to do a heavy bombing campaign, possibly supported by ground troops. Now, I say speculation because, well, this is essentially what the US is signaling. But on the other hand, it's not sure if they will actually go through with this because it seems to be a bit of a suicide operation. You can't just send in 7,000 troops into Iran and be successful. It is possible that they could try to seek to capture some of these islands of Iran in the Strait of Hormuz in order to control it. But it will be, if they're able to take them, they're not able to hold them because they're within very close proximity to the Iranian mainland, and they would be sitting there like sitting ducks. So it's really unclear what the US is planning to do. And I think that's what really defines this war. That is that the US doesn't really have a strategy. They were aiming for regime change. It didn't pan out as expected, and they're not really sure what to do anymore. And so I think they're not able to declare victory and go home because the Strait of Hormuz isn't in their control, and they're not able to defeat Iran. So I think some desperate moves can be, well, that's the most likely scenario.
Well, President Trump and not the United States wants nuclear dust, and he also wants uranium. How is he going to get that if Iran is adamant that this is their product, it's for peaceful purposes, and it's for citizens' purposes, and we cannot give it to you?
Well, this was always the problem. If the US was only concerned about Iran's nuclear program, then they could have had a deal
Trump.
with Iran.
Dr. Deason?
They did have a...
Dr. Deason?
Yes?
Trump,
Yes.
not the United States. Trump.
No, well, that's a fair point. He's the one who sought a revision over this deal. But it's also true that it's the wider, I guess, political establishment in Washington who has attempted to link the nuclear issue to other issues. So, for example, arguing that it's not enough to give up to have enough transparency on the idea of not acquiring nuclear weapons, but also linking it to not having the missile capabilities, abandoning regional allies, and of course, as you suggested now, not even having a civilian nuclear program. That's something Marco Rubio has been hammering about as well. So it is highly unlikely, and this is why I think you've seen the US objectives overall, or Trump's objective, if you will, go everywhere. When they first invaded, they talked about regime change, allegedly for humanitarian reasons to help protesters or liberate women. But given that they're seeking now the destruction of Iran, they're talking about the missile capabilities and regional allies. When they're not successful there, they also try to gain more sympathy from the international community by arguing that this is all about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. So the US hasn't really been clear in terms of its objectives. Once the regime change operation failed, they're essentially clinging to different straws.
Professor, now that you've brought up that point, and I think it's a very important point about objectives, has the US, or indeed Israel, achieved their objectives, which have been flimsy, as you suggested? And what do you think will be an impediment for Trump when this is all over?
Well, it all depends what the objective is. If the objective is for Iran not to have nuclear weapons, then probably killing Khamenei, which was one of the key opponents of acquiring nuclear weapons, was not a good idea. Also, the efforts to destroy Iran's conventional deterrence, that is, its missile capabilities and drones and regional allies. If this is weakened, then they would have to rely on a nuclear deterrence. So in this regard, I think bombing and killing a lot of people isn't necessarily achieving an objective. It's probably achieving the exact opposite. And in terms of degrading Iran's capabilities, I'm sure they had some successes. I mean, they've hit production facilities in Iran. The Israelis hit their steel production. The Iranians have also used a lot of missiles and drones. So you can argue that also with the loss of some launching equipment, that Iran's capabilities have been diminished. But of course, this could be restored. And I think at the end of the day, these are not real achievements. What they wanted was regime changing Iran, and given that there wasn't a government in reserve which they could install, it would have likely resulted in the balkanization of Iran and making it inefficient and weak, and thus not capable of threatening Israel. So I don't think any of these goals can really be achieved anymore. And this is the main problem, because now a key objective for the US might, although they don't admit it, is to find a way out. And the only way the US can leave is if Iran opens up the Strait of Hormuz, because the Iranians have their own goals. They don't want to be attacked anymore by the US and Israel. And if they control the Strait of Hormuz, they can demand that the Gulf states stop hosting US bases. They can essentially tax them for using the Strait of Hormuz to get reparation for the attack on Iran. They can even compel the Gulf states to stop trading oil in US dollars. So Iran can achieve a lot of its objectives against the US as long as it controls the Strait of Hormuz. So I think implicitly now the main objective of the US is to get an end to this war. And to get an end to it without outright defeat, they have to get the Strait of Hormuz under their control. And there's simply no good military alternatives or options at the table. If they had if they could mobilize 100, 150,000 men, maybe something could be done. But they didn't plan for this. They don't have the required men, and they don't have any proper war plans. So the US is in a very desperate situation now, which is not, I would say that's not necessarily great for the Iranians either, because you don't want a declining hegemon being this desperate.
Professor, it's good to see you. We'll have to end this discussion here. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.